All right. Well, thank you for joining us. In this episode, we sit down with Oby Morgan, founder of Capital at Play. We get into all sorts of stuff, primarily around the idea that everyone today is a publishing company. Before we get into it, let's listen to a soundbite from Oby.
And if any one of those three legs of the stool are missing, you're going to quit at some point. Like it's destined for failure over a long enough timeline. And so I figure if you own the business, you better like the product. If you don't, I don't know who you could talk to, but you're probably the person to change it. So that's a given. So you have to have two other things. You got to make some money and you got to have some fun. I mean, a business can't we had this thing, I find some people don't like to talk about the fact that they're in business to make money, but it's very much like I'm getting out of bed every day to eat breakfast. Is that my raison d'etre? No. But if I don't eat breakfast or eat lunch or at least eat dinner, it's going to be a short trip, So you have to make money. Like, I don't care whether you like it, whether you're not comfortable with it, whatever. It's the way of the world. And you have to have some fun. So it's Capital at Play.
Welcome to Making It in Asheville, a podcast where you get to hear the stories behind some of your favorite local artists and businesses here in town. Each episode, we interview a different local Ashevillean. We find out what they're doing, how they're making it in Asheville, and we work to uncover actionable insights and lessons that you can then apply to your own work, life, and business.
And we are your hosts. That was Sarah. I am Tony. We are a husband and wife team that moved to Asheville in May of 2019.
I love how that rhymes.
Me too. And since then, we set out to answer the question, how does one make it in Asheville? This podcast has been the result. We've now interviewed, almost 50 people. We're in the 40s easily of podcast guests, of entrepreneurs, artists, makers here in Asheville. And this episode is a very special episode. We sit down with Oby Morgan, who founded Capital at Play, which is, if you haven't held one in your hands, one of the most beautiful business magazines that we have. We have a stack of them just here behind us. And we were very excited to share some of the stories and lessons from that episode and that conversation with you. But first, let's do a quick little sponsor from our local sponsor here in Asheville, Range Urgent Care.
Range is a walk-in clinic here in town, and they are owned and founded by a husband and wife team. The things that we love about Range is that they are transforming and really reimagining the way that healthcare is typically done for a walk-in clinic. And so they offer things like virtual visits. You can actually schedule your appointments that you don't have to wait when you get there. Completely transparent pricing, so you know exactly what you're going to pay, as well as subscription membership. So you can pay a set amount every single month and know that you can walk in and get a certain number of visits and have your healthcare covered.
Yeah, and what we're hearing is that that's fantastic for people like me who might be more injury prone or risk tolerant, knowing that every month I'm paying $30 and I can go to them anytime that I need for support, service, help. That is I think a sigh of relief when the alternative can be a gigantic check from a emergency clinic. And there is a difference certainly between emergency room care and things that are, require emergency rooms and things that are urgent care applicable. And I find myself in most need of urgent care support, not ER support. And so it's a beautiful thing. If you're interested in learning more, visit makingitinasheville.com/range. We have more information about Range Urgent Care and some of the subscription offers that they provide. If you sign up using Making It in Asheville as a coupon code on the Range site, or use any of the links from our website to subscription plans, you will save the first month's worth of the subscription plan. And that's fantastic, especially if you're a small business with a bunch of employees you want to offer this to. That savings adds up real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one more time, makingitinasheville.com/range to read more about it.
So a little bit more about this episode. As you know, we are interviewing Oby Morgan, who is the founder of Capital at Play. And I think just about everybody here in Asheville is pretty familiar with Capital at Play, but just in case you're not, it is a fantastic editorial magazine, print magazine, that interviews and has long format articles with local businesses here in town. So we were really, really excited to be able to talk with Oby because clearly we have a lot of overlap between our own podcast and what he's been doing for years, but also just really interesting to talk about being in the media industry.
Yeah, three of the when we were talking about how we would talk about this episode, three of the things that came up was one, everyone in Oby's language, everyone's a publisher today. Mm-hmm. In our words, we think that everyone's a media company. The essence is the same. So it's like, how do we think about the ideas of constantly publishing content and in a world where content is constantly changing? And so Oby went print, and I think it's an incredible story and strategy of like, the blind ambition. That's the second idea. Blind ambition necessary to start a project like that. We've heard it. If we've heard it once, we've heard it, I don't know, dozens of times now, that if our guests had known how much work it would take to do what they've done, they might not have started. Yeah.
And so we kind of poll Oby on what he's seen from interviewing many different entrepreneurs and talking with many different entrepreneurs in town on what he thinks is kind of that X factor for that entrepreneur. And so one of them is blind ambition, but we talk a lot more about it in the episode, so I don't want to spoil too much.
The last note is the idea that in addition to blind ambition, it's a choice. Most entrepreneurs are choosing to be optimistic. And we see that as well in almost all of our interview guests and in all of his past interviews and articles. The entrepreneurs that stand out as successful amongst the masses are those who follow their ambition almost blindly, choose to be optimistic, and think about their business oftentimes as a media company, constantly telling stories.
So the one last thing I'll add is that it's interesting that because Oby himself started a business and experienced all of these things. So we talk about, the fact of starting a media company, but also his observations of other entrepreneurs. So it's like this double whammy of entrepreneurship.
And certainly from our perspective, we see the journey that Capital at Play has taken from, an idea 10 years ago to a institution locally. And that is, it's a incredibly, I would say, inspiring story for us to see what is possible when you just are consistent and persistent. So without further ado, let's hop into episode 56 with Oby Morgan, founder of Capital at Play. Hey, Oby, thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what's happening in your world today.
Sure. I'm Oby Morgan. In at least the Asheville area, I'm notably the publisher of the only business publication, Capital at Play magazine. I started that in 2010 when I was still in college, I guess. That's crazy. And I don't know, guys. You're going to have to focus me. Forgive me.
No, I think that's a great answer. So today we're talking about building, as I see it, a media company, Capital at Play. When we showed up, was the business proper media company in Asheville. We have loved it. We have a whole stack of them in our little library here. And
we're collectors.
We're collectors. We're readers. We've used some of the ad spots and the stories to source who we've tried to meet and connect with in the city. So Capital at Play is a perfect answer, and thank you for going there. That's what we're asking. I guess, we can talk about what's happening in Capital at Play today. We could start at the beginning. You said you started it in college. What is it like saying, I'm going to start a print magazine in college, or did you not think specifically print magazine? What were the first thoughts?
That's a fair question. I think I wasn't thinking of it as I was thinking of it as a print magazine because there's something really nice about print, and especially print done well, something that's really tactile and pleasing to touch, especially when that's not as common. I think it carries a little more weight and means a little bit more, but No, I don't think I ever really felt like we were pigeonholed insofar as being in print any more than we wanted to be, right? Like it's a wonderful medium for the style of content that the magazine itself is based around, which are these long form interviews with entrepreneurs. And it's sort of evergreen, which is nice. It's going to be maybe not as relevant, but certainly mostly relevant even a year or two later. So print's a nice format for it, but it's more about the content, right? I mean, I guess I don't know where I could think of the best example, but I guess like radio is probably the best example because now I see radio stations have they do what you're doing, right? I mean, this is like a typical radio style interview, but we're recording video and that's going to be posted, right? And you could take the same thing and have a transcript of it written down. So the medium for the content is less relevant these days, right? It's more about the nature of it and the subject matter and how it gets delivered, just insofar that it suits the listener's needs.
Sure. Yeah. And so tell
Does
us a
that
little.
make sense? Like it's a huge topic to talk about, so I'm not trying to just like, sound so amorphous.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic because we kind of tend to, I think, lean on podcasting or audio because we feel like that's how people are tuning in these days, and they're they don't have time to read, which is not true because I think there are people out there that still enjoy sitting down with their magazine or their newspaper in the morning with their coffee and reading it. But it is interesting just seeing the trend towards other forms of medium. So I guess that's a question for you is like, have you noticed things changing and shifting at Capital at Play in terms of mediums that are consumed?
Well, I mean, in the last 8 weeks, tremendously so. I mean, obviously people aren't out and about in the same ways that they were even in January or February. So very different in that regard. And we're finding new avenues for distribution, ones that are actually, I think, extremely, like they're going to stay. They're going to stick with us. Like Mother Earth Produce puts one in their deliveries and that sort of thing. And so that kind of stuff is a whole new channel that we would have never explored otherwise. Also, digital is just I mean, look, that's why we don't write letters anymore. I mean, that's probably the real thought that I had way back then about print is like, okay, news, information transferal, digital is the way to go. I don't write anyone a letter and put it in the mail. I send them an email because it's instantaneous. And you need that efficiency. You need that immediate transferal of time-sensitive information. But with something like a profile on an entrepreneur and why they get out of bed and do what they do every day and the trials and tribulations of their journey and lessons learned, that I don't need that instantly. Take the time to do something a little more and to put it into print and to produce it and distribute it that way. So, I think it just depends on the importance of it and what you're trying to say. You all are very familiar with this. I mean, you guys probably have a lot of opinions about this as creatives yourself. You're into podcasts because you can do other things at the same time, presumably. I mean, what do you think? I got a hand raised there. You like to read, so.
Well, I mean, I think. I don't think we thought about it too much before we came to Asheville. It wasn't like we did research and we were like, oh, no one is doing a podcast about businesses. I don't know. We didn't look at Capital Play and say, well, we're not going to do written because Capital Play is doing it or something like that. I think we just felt like it was fun and the best medium for us because we like to talk and have that, physical interaction with someone.
I think that's a fair answer. I would say that we chose this medium because no one gets, at least with the two of us, no one gets speaker's block. And a conversation that takes 90 minutes likely will have some gems in it and jewels in it that can be harvested and shared. And there's likely going to be a relationship that's the result of 90 minutes of thoughtful conversation. And so it was the lowest barrier to entry on creating something meaningful that might have staying power, to your point, that is not just news, right? We didn't get into tweeting when we arrived here. We got into a longer form, meaningful conversation. And so, and just kind of committed. And so it's one thing to have a zero barrier medium, which is podcasting, right? All you need is some of the tools. Ours are slightly more sophisticated than a cell phone, right? But I can record a conversation with you and put it on the internet with no barriers. So there's a zero barrier platform, which is podcasting, right? You need servers, let's say. High barrier platform of thoughtful, long form printed material from concept to first edition. What kind of things can you remember coming up as like major roadblocks or issues or learnings in the early days?
Yeah, nice segue there. So I think you said it well, right? It's a tremendously expensive thing to produce. And so that's a certain barrier there for sure. But it seemed like an important thing that, well, so the time that we were selling, we were pre-selling advertising is not probably drastically different from where we are now or where we're going shortly, economically speaking. And so
and this was around date stamp 2010, 2009?
Yeah, 2010. We started selling the advertising around June of 2010.
Okay.
Am I getting that right? When did we launch? It's so funny. Like, it would be totally clear to think about. Yeah, we launched in September 2000. No, September 2011.
Okay.
Jesus, don't quote me. I don't even know.
Dates. I don't
like,
do dates. I don't do dates.
Anyways, I think it was September 2011. So we started in June selling advertising. We knew we had to hit a certain goal, how much we needed to pre-sell so that we could just afford to put this thing out and, have me be chief cook and bottle washer and not starve to death. And finding a good printer, it's not as you would think. It would just be really easy. Like, you pick the paper and you have them print it, right? But it's like everyone. I didn't even realize there were things that they call office copies, and office copies, like if you're going to have a run of 10,000 or 100,000, whatever, they're not all perfect, and there's tolerances that are acceptable and unacceptable, and I don't know. You'd just be surprised at how perfection is not a given, and that you can't expect every copy to be perfect. I mean, I just got a message from someone last week, and it was like a yellow streak through a page. Like, that was serious. I'd never see that. But it's probably on 20 copies. Like, that's just the way these machines work and understanding it. And so you got to find somebody who can work on this, who's actually got a tolerance for perfection that matches yours. It's like, it's just very funny. You would think that like every copy is perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen like an ESPN the magazine or a Bon Appetit with a yellow streak down the middle, and so you just there's an assumption that it can't be that hard to make perfect printed things, which is, I know that's not true, because any printer that anybody's ever interacted with has effed up tons of times, and no one knows how to use it, and there's always an issue. So how would there not be issues when you scale it up to even more important stuff?
Yeah, I mean, they have them. I mean, the machine, it's really cool to do a walkthrough on the press. I mean, this one that we use right now is like half the size of a football field. It's a $60 million machine. And like, when they bought this machine last year, 2 years ago, and I went and saw them install it at our printer, they had a team from Heidelberg, from Germany, that was living with them for, I think, 2 months to make sure it was getting up and running. We can do a run of 10,000 magazines on it in about 15 minutes.
Wow.
And, they have people watching it and like cameras scanning it, and like, it's a crazy operation. So, I mean, yeah, just there's something fun about that and different and interesting. And, it's not, there's a barrier there, but, I don't know, there's something nice about that too. But it extends to all these different mediums at the end of the day, right? Sorry, I think you might have a thought there.
No, I was just going to say, like, so were you in a college newspaper, and you're like, we can do this at our college, I can do this in Asheville, like, what? Because it's one thing to have an idea, and call it my assumption, but it seems like a large step to go from, I enjoy, and this is my assumption, I enjoy long-form, thoughtful pieces about entrepreneurs and their stories, to I'm going to print a physical magazine with incredible photography and is paid for by advertising, and it's going to start a year from now. Like, that is a big step. And so, do you come from a publisher family? Did you just Google where's the nearest printer for magazines? Like, what does even step one look like?
Oh, that's a fair question. Okay, so my dad and my parents are in publishing.
Okay.
And not in this kind of publishing at all, but they don't come from that background either. And so my dad was in furniture manufacturing for his whole life into his 50s. And then decided to, well, obviously the bottom fell out on manufacturing in North America in a lot of ways in the late 90s. And so that stopped and he shut it down and had a great career. But he did a very good job. I would say both my parents did a good job of instilling a certain sense of irreverence in me, which probably has driven a lot of people nuts, especially educators around me. But regardless of the gray hairs I given those folks, kind people they were. But I wouldn't look at it and say like, oh, I don't know how to do that, so I can't do it. Like, why? I don't know. I mean, it's how hard can it be? Like, you literally just start calling. You're like, okay, well, we need to find someone who can print really high quality magazine. Like, okay, well, what kinds are there? Well, there's some that have an actual edge and a binding, and there are some that are just stapled. Well, okay, I've seen those stapled ones. They're not that fancy looking. I mean, that seems like it's important that you cross that barrier to launch something that looks good and that feels good, because if you want to be taken seriously, it needs to look like something that's serious. And at the same time, we want it to be fun and beautiful. And, so you want all that stuff to show through. Actually, I remember in our prototypes, because you can't go out and sell advertising with like a poster board. I mean, really look like sorry, I'm beating on the table here. It will look like you just came out of a classroom, like for a presentation. I don't want something that's on it's not supposed to be my vision board. It's a magazine that I want you to spend money on advertising it. Mm-hmm. And so we did real stories and had real photos, and it was a real publication, got real ads for free from people to put them together. And actually we were getting 50 copies printed, which is they're crazy expensive to just do 50 copies. It's like the same cost as doing like 5,000.
Sure.
But it had to have something real. And I remember getting them back, going down and picking them up from a printer we found within about an hour drive. And they had just trimmed an extra 3/4 of an inch off and kind of shrunk it. And they were like, well, you told us these are just your prototypes, right? And I was like, no, they're your prototypes now. I don't want something that's close. I need something that is, and that kind of illustrating the point about, the printing industry is probably ripe for, well, actually it has in the last decade consolidated a lot, because a lot of the small printers have shuttered. It's really, really competitive and tough industry, but
What was the inspiration?
You just started blind ambition to answer your original question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I would have had a daughter 17 months ago if I really knew what it would take. And it's great. And it's a challenge every day. But, if you knew what it would take to do something, would you really do it? Really?
Totally. Yeah.
If we've heard that once.
We've heard that so many times from different people we've interviewed and talked to, and they're just like, you just don't know, you just do it, and then you realize all the hard things, but also wonderful things about it. But what was the inspiration for the topic of this magazine? I mean, were you just always fascinated by entrepreneurs? What did you study at school? Where did you get this idea?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've definitely always been fascinated by business, and I grew up around people who had small businesses, and my parents' friends and my friends' parents, and you hear these conversations around around the dinner table, right? I mean, the work doesn't stop just because you go home. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what you're thinking about all the time, especially when you are, at the helm, right? Mm-hmm. And I also really liked case studies in, I think, business strategy, something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And this teacher actually would just make us read the Wall Street Journal and we would go through and break down what different businesses were doing based on what we could learn and understand there. And he had other case studies and modules and stuff, but I really enjoyed just learning about these businesses, and I thought this would be a fun way to continue that. I had a really interesting teacher. This must have been junior year or something like that. It was a retired CEO of what was at the time the largest pastry manufacturer in North America. And he really had, I think I can say this, he wouldn't mind, had no idea how to put together like a syllabus or a quiz. He had wealth of knowledge, though. I mean, he had started as like a salesperson and become their head of sales, and actually come up with some inventions and acquired a couple patents along the way. And I think a really interesting guy. He retired and just wanted to give back, but he and I just basically spent the first semester that he was there just talking in class. Like, he'd tell a story and I'd just start talking with him, and we'd just start talking. And there'd be these great things that you could learn by, I mean, it was the same stuff that I enjoyed talking with people that were in business in a casual sense. This is the best story that could sum up the lesson you can learn from context as opposed to the theory of a textbook. And forgive me, this is probably not a polite story, but it's true. And that's the best part about it. They had a huge problem with shrink in their shipping from Charlotte to Charleston. And he was the head of sales that had something to do with looking after that, shrink being like a loss on their product. That was, and they couldn't figure out why. They used independent truckers. The truckers would stop for lunch. You can't tell them when to work. That's the nature of an independent relationship. But it's not really a problem. They go into the restaurant, they turn off their truck and the refrigeration unit to save gas, and they come back out 30 minutes later and they hit the road and everything's good. But on this particular stretch of I-26, if you're familiar, there are a number of establishments. There's strip clubs, a lot of them. And when you stop for lunch at a strip club, you don't go in for 30 minutes. You go in for like an hour and 30 minutes. And that's a long time to leave a truck off and the refrigeration unit off. And so the only way he could figure this out was to literally park himself on the side of the road and look for their trucks and follow them and see what was going on. And then all they had to do was pick up some stops in Atlanta, route the traffic that way, and they solved the problem. But it's like, that's not a textbook solution. Yeah. That's hilarious and fascinating. And like, you got to just be there to see that, you know, and like, that's a problem he didn't know how to approach. But like, okay, well, what do? Let's go see what they're doing. Sort of just like, how do you start a magazine? Well, you need photos and words. Okay. What are they going to be about? Okay. Well, where are you going to put them? Okay. And you just, start. Yeah. I don't know. So those lessons are great. I love that. Counterintuitive. I think we all like a little bit of that sort of surprise element of like, I don't know, solutions that are out of the box. Right. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing got me fascinated with just learning about business. I was like, this is great. I could literally do that all day. Just learn about this all the time. So I think the print part of it, being a print magazine, was really just a way to connect with the kind of audience. And it seemed like a good way to go because I didn't want to sell something at the time. I don't know. I mean, it seems like now you could totally launch a fully digital magazine and have a great audience. And, there's a lot of benefits to that. But at the time, this just seemed like the right way to go. Yeah. And I don't know, it's funny. Like I look back and you have like all of these covers and all of these editions, and it's cool to have it in print. I don't know if it would have been a print publication if it was started today. It's a good question, though. You didn't ask that. That's what I'm asking myself. It's like, would we have done it that way? I don't know.
And,
maybe.
Well, so, I mean, one of the things that stands out for me, and I see in some small way similarity between what you've done and what we have just set out on, is that it stands as some, I would say, substantial enough difference from what exists, right? So like all of the, the magazines that exist for like grab this in a space in Asheville, like of them, there are two that are beautiful. One is yours, and everything else has a staple bound, and it's like printed on sort of newspaper paper, and it's okay. And I'm sure that they sell a bunch of ads too, but like yours is the beautiful one. Capital at Play like spoke to us when we showed up. There weren't many that we grabbed. We grabbed that. And so I think that it stands as a pattern break aside from what's normal. Having imagine a cold email that goes out to some entrepreneur or another saying, hey, this is this beautiful product that we put out. It's quarterly, like GQ. You probably could pin magazines that you're like. You get a yes versus, hey, I have a blog. Or, hey, I have this Instagram account, which might not have been even a plausible conversation 10 years ago. But, like, it's just so different. Like, there were plenty of bloggers in 2009, like, interviewing people about business. There wasn't anything that promised to be world-class, best in class as a business publication, I imagine, in the region, or at least in Western North Carolina. How did the name Capital at Play come to you? Because that always struck me as well as a great name for a publication.
Thank you. It was circuitous, actually. I just found another cover that I mocked up with a fella, actually, an ex-Disney Imagineer, childhood friend of mine's dad, who actually was in town and ended up crashing on my couch for like a week, and we worked on another name and like a whole design, and like it's just funny how the name thing goes. And actually, I have something. My dad has it. I gave it to him because he kind of was like, I don't know. This is going to be like, I'm sorry to sputter, but it was such a weird. I don't know exactly how we got there, but I knew that it had to be. So he has this philosophy. Maybe it's not his, but it's like if you're in sales, everybody's in sales, right? Basically, you're selling something somewhere to somebody. At the very least, we're selling content that we want someone to listen, right? There's a cost of time to pay for it, but and maybe they need to give you their email address. But regardless, you're all selling something, and to be good in sales, you need to have three things. This is David Morgan philosophy here. You have to like the product. If you don't like the product, it's really hard. People will tell. It's at some point that'll shine through, and it'll be a problem. You got to make some money, because otherwise you can't live or eat or whatever. So that's just like an essential gas in the tank kind of thing. And you got to have some fun, because if you don't have any fun, everything kind of takes more work than you really think it's going to take. So if you don't enjoy it, that's really an uphill battle. And if any one of those three legs of the stool are missing, you're going to quit at some point. Like it's destined for failure over a long enough timeline. And so I figure if you own the business, you better like the product. If you don't, I don't know who you could talk to, but you're probably the person to change it. So that's a given. So you have to have two other things. You got to make some money, and you got to have some fun. I mean, a business can't we have this thing. I find some people don't like to talk about the fact that they're in business to make money, but it's very much like I'm getting out of bed every day to eat breakfast. Is that my raison d'etre? No. But if I don't eat breakfast or eat lunch or at least eat dinner, it's going to be a short trip, So you have to make money. Like, I don't care whether you like it, whether you're not comfortable with it, whatever. It's the way of the world. And you have to have some fun. So it's Capital at Play. And we had capitalism at play. I mean, you'll notice capitalism is a major theme of it. And I felt like it was really important to stand that ground a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe that's like an idyllic 22-year-old kind of a thing to like really have something you want to hold like that. But it is. It's the most. I think I would defend it if someone challenged it. Like, it's got to be the most fair socioeconomic philosophy the world has ever seen. I'm not talking about unfettered capitalism. I'm not talking about like free market everything. I'm just saying the notion of capitalism where you decide what business you want to start and you're able to go and capture whatever value you can create by that. That's amazing. That's a wonderful thing. And I feel like that's really important to acknowledge, because if we allow maybe 4% of the private sector economy to co-opt that word to mean something that brings up visions of a monocle and a top hat, and I guess I'm describing
monopoly
Morgan here, but yeah, it's like that's not the monopoly man. That's not fair. We need that word to describe what we do as small business. Being allowed to go and start a business that you want. I don't know why. but a hairdresser still requires more hours of continuing education than an EMT in North Carolina. So I don't know why, but I feel like maybe I'm not right about that. Don't quote me on it, but I'm just saying those kinds of regulations are maybe less helpful to business, but I don't know, maybe it's really important. So I'm not advocating for unfettered capitalism, but it's important to like understand what you do and have a word to describe it. So we wanted that to be a part of it. But the problem is when you have capitalism at play, the words get really narrow. They get like really short.
Sure.
It's like too many characters on something that's 10 and 9 inches wide. So you had to shorten that. And I had this thing, I gave it back to my dad. He actually, being the savvy graphic designer he is, cut out letters to like work on this one night when we were like stuck. And it looks like a ransom note. So I framed it up and you know what I mean? Like the cut out letters, everything. Mm-hmm. So that's how we came up with the name. But I would say in hindsight, don't put the word "at" in your name because it just makes telling people your email address a pain.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I think we hit we did pretty well aside from that with coming up with it.
Capital at play at. Yeah, that's a good lesson there. And if there's a single soundbite from the entire thing, it's don't put "at" in your business name. No, but that's
the other one from a printer I'll give you is don't put yellow in your logo.
Heard.
Interesting. We have yellow in our logo.
In our business logo. Yeah. Tell us about the yellow in the logo. Give me more.
It just sucks for contrast. It doesn't play well. If you're trying to overlay a color on a photo, which we do on covers every month, yellow is a nightmare. Heard. It's not quite dark enough and it's not quite light enough. And I don't know, I stuck with it for a long time and then we started to change it. But just one of those things. I had like a printer tell me after a while, like when I was complaining why it didn't show up, he's like, yeah, I mean, yellow is just the worst, man. And I was like, what? And he like went into this whole thing. I was like, oh, okay.
Color theory is this whole wild world that I've...
Well, it's not even like color theory because like the color yellow is like nice and cheery or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But I understand what you're saying. Like we experience it with like a lot of the buttons on our website are yellow because I want it to be bright and stand out and people to click them. But the text overlay is white and because black looks like black and yellow, like no, it doesn't look like us. And so it just is really hard to read. So I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, like that's just one of those, but you don't know till you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, dang. I mean, that's a great story about coming to Capital at Play. I think also it's, for what it's worth, Capital at Play is more, while the letters fit better on 9 inches of, width, I think it's slightly more welcoming than capitalism at play, though it's championing the same ideals or concept. And I love how those are the two legs on the stool of like what makes a salesperson successful, aka a business successful. That's even better than I could have hoped for. I thought perfect answer. A question as you went through like I'm imagining tasty cakes or Entenmann's, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Are there other stories that have stood out to you in the last 10 years, whether it be some in-depth pieces that you've written about local businesses? Can
I interrupt you? Because one of the questions I had, and I think this would segue really nice into that, but is who were the first people that you interviewed in Asheville?
Yeah, who said yes first? That's a great place to start.
Oh, that's actually, I couldn't be happier to say. It was Oscar Wong, Highland Brewing. Yeah. And that was so we produced a mock-up version. We had to have some copies to sell with and prove to ourselves we could do this, actually. Yeah. And the first writer we had working with us was a fellow by the name of Bill Fishburne, and Bill still writes our real estate article every year. He's done like everything. He used to run his family's or helped run his family's tobacco drying business, which is a huge employer up here for a long time. Fishburne International. He was an editor for Car and Driver. He used to race Saabs. I think he has like over 10,000 jumps out of an airplane. He had a talk radio show. He's like the guy is the kind of person, if you needed like 1,000 words added to the article, it call him and tell him like, I need another 1,000 words. He'd be like, okay, give me an hour, like done. But he was in Rotary with Oscar, and so he asked him if he could do this interview with him, because I was hiring Bill to do this. And that's the only job I've never actually done is write the stories, as I would queue up the people by getting a pre-interview and setting the stage and making notes for the writer, and like, but it's such a different side of your brain to write than it is to do the other 9 things, that it would just be, I don't know, didn't really have the time. You can't do it while you're trying to manage a business. At least I can't. My brain doesn't write well under pressure in that way. But anyways, yeah, Oscar Wong was the first one we did for the prototype edition, and that ended up going into the first edition. So that's kind of interesting, thinking of how far they've come, actually.
Yeah, I love that. We interviewed Leah.
Season 2?
Yeah, in the fall, I think it was. And it was so interesting to hear their story and how long they've been around and just the impact that they've had here in Asheville, and her talk about Oscar as well. And so interesting.
Yeah,
I'd
that
love
was his
to go back
retirement job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't even a real thing. It wasn't meant to be a career, I guess. I still remember what he said, stuck with me in the interview, that I thought was just interesting. He said, this brewery is like a 50-foot dinosaur. And it's like a 50-foot dinosaur because you can't let it die, because what do you do with a dead 50-foot dinosaur in your backyard? But you can't really afford to feed this thing either. I thought that was interesting perspective on manufacturing.
That's
so
a strong metaphor. Yeah, that's awesome. And I one of the things that's standing out for me, I'm like, how does this translate to other people in early phases of their business? And with the idea specifically of you're starting this project, it's one thing to be able to sit down and communicate well and say, here's my idea. It's another thing to have a physical version, though it's a prototype, but a physical version that says this is what it's going to look like, or this is what I've already done. It's no longer conceptual at that point. It's very practical, physical, real. And what we found was, our early podcast guests were, let's call it 1 degree of separation from us, either what few friends we already had before arriving to town, or people that we more or less were employing through our wedding process, who probably felt obligated. But because those early people said yes, we had a season 2 that we could say, hey, look back at the work that we've done. This is what we're doing. And so do you think that you could have gotten your first advertisers or your first sponsors or whatever the revenue would be if you had not gone through that first print run?
probably not. I mean, you don't ever know, but I would say I feel like it was so important to have something like that. And when I think of a couple of our first sales, I mean, people buying behavior is just a funny thing anyways, which I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole, but I just sort of went reminiscing for a second there. It's like people either bought because they just liked you and, saw this kid sitting here and like, okay, sure, we'll try it. I guess we'll see where this goes. Or they sat there and read the damn thing.
Yeah.
I think it was Forest Commercial Bank at the time. The president of the bank was just sitting there and he basically just opened it up and read it for 20 minutes. You just sit there okay, I mean, yeah, that's awesome. And then he bought an ad, full page ad. He's like, is the inside back cover available? He said, okay, I'll take that for a year.
Wow.
But probably couldn't have, I don't know.
Yeah.
Really hard to say, but I definitely know that, I mean, and you will probably know this well, it's hard to literally get a free interview with someone. I'm not charging people for the articles, and I'm saying, hey, I just want to tell people that why you do what you do. I just think it's interesting. You might be an interesting person, and to have someone run you out of their store because they think you're trying to sell them something is bizarre. But I mean, I guess there's a certain amount of faith that goes into someone representing you well, and over time that became a lot easier to, now when we call someone and say we'd like to do a profile on you, they have an expectation, they're excited, they actually want to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to, I think the way I thought about it is, I mean, especially as a single 20-something in Asheville, it's like trying to get a date just to let them have a writer talk to them so I can print pages of free publicity for these people. It's like, I don't know, not easy.
Yeah,
there's a trust factor when you don't have anything to show for it yet. I think that's the hardest part, is just starting out and getting, like you said, that first interview, that first advertiser to say yes, because they have nothing to go on. They're just leaving faith.
Yeah.
So what was your first one?
So we've only just now got our first sponsor after the better part of a year of putting out a podcast, and it's Range Urgent Care. And that came as, 1 degree of separation. We put out feelers who might be a good fit to be a sponsor in the community, that, any person would be a good customer type for them. And we had a short list that came up. They were the first people that we talked to. And it was just a number of human conversations. And we're very excited about it. We just, over the weekend, this past weekend, we got word that their new location's first business, so there's monthly subscription plans that you can have with Range. Their Black Mountain location's first business membership came as a result of someone hearing about it through our podcast, which is like the coolest feeling. We've had a bunch of cool feelings through the last year. That is probably the coolest feeling so far.
And I think that makes you officially professionals. I'd like to just say congratulations and thank you very much for hosting me on
a very professional podcast. Yeah, I mean, it's not from.
Well, it feels that way anyways, so you should know. But
Thank
I just mean, it's like you're officially an influencer now, or something like that, right?
We're waiting for the plaque to come in from Instagram and all of that. But thank you. I mean, I think. And this is something that I'm just imagining was true from those early customers of you, looking into the eyes of a 22-year-old. We have taken this very seriously, the podcasting thing, and there are ways to do it that are less serious. And I think that there's something powerful that happens across either a computer screen or across a table from someone where they know that you're very serious about what it is that you're doing. And sometimes that is the propellant that allows the thing to happen. And so I see this kind of initiative, and I don't know, if you had known how hard it would have been, maybe you wouldn't have done it back then, or if you would do it again. But back then you were so in that it almost had to happen, and someone was going to say yes if you took enough at bats. I'm wondering about sales, the way that you sold ads or sponsorships or whatever the words you might use for the way Capital at Play made money. Were there any strategies that came out over time that were maybe different than how you started initially, because you realized that it's better as a business person to sell a year's worth of subscription or ads, or 2 years, or lock them into a rate for multiple years than this next publication? I'm wondering, anything stand out sales-wise?
No, I mean, I can't think that there was. Well, there was. Eventually I had a strategy, which was a big change. I mean, truly, but no, I mean, in terms of basic pricing structure and how to create that, I don't think we haven't ever really changed it. It's probably not perfect, but I think it's worked. I mean, it's just like you would imagine, right? You charge people less for more of the same thing because, you want to incentivize them to do that. And, aside from other subtle nuances, no, but the way that you go about selling, I mean, that's what I just described earlier about why people buy. I went to school for marketing and international business. And so I wanted people to buy because I was selling them something that provided value, right? So I was going to make sure that I was better than anybody else out there, any other option in terms of price, placement, product, promotion. Wanted to make sure that I could tell them logically exactly why this was the right thing for them. And that's not really why people buy all the time. And so that's something you learn, and, makes you a little less type A++ in a sales meeting, probably. But, those kinds of things, times a million are probably more of the lessons, the things that influence the strategy over time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. You hone that skill over time. What about things that you've noticed from entrepreneurs that Capital Play has interviewed? Have you noticed that there is this sort of trend or same thing that, all the businesses sort of have within them, or, most of them have within them that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that this is the only one, nor is it probably prevalent in all, but I'll be curious to know what your thoughts are on this. I gave this thought at a presentation at the Collider like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was followed by some guy who's from he's like from Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley, like splits his time. I'm like thinking this is pretty sweet. I'm like being considered to talk at the same time as this guy who's clearly got way better credentials. And he might have been like one of the only people to actually, I think, clap or anything to this thought. But I think that entrepreneurs actually exhibit a lot of the same traits. If I was a clinical psychologist as an addict, probably. And I think I'm not trying to say that entrepreneurs are addicts. I guess it's just a funny observation that we engage in, and I'm sure you can relate to this, in all kinds of self-deprecating and detrimental behaviors, right? Yeah. Not just physically because you work long hours or don't eat right or, whatever those kinds of things are, don't exercise. You also engage in things that are monetarily risky. Risky behavior in a lot of ways, taking risks that, could cause real problems for you or for your family. You even have hallucinations. It's just when you see something that nobody else has seen before, right? And so I think that's kind of interesting. It requires a certain tenacity to get something off the ground. And so I think blind ambition goes a lot in there. It's hard to pin down. In context, I could focus the thought a little more, but I think there's definitely different. Well, okay, actually, that's probably something that's verifiable statistically. I just finished an interesting book on venture capital called VC in American History, and had all these wonderful charts, and a trait that you probably heard before. I didn't learn from this book necessarily, but it was echoed a lot. The person who's best suited to start a business is not necessarily the best person to run a business. And so I think there's definitely some personality traits that are different for someone who starts a business as someone who manages it. And, I think people that do well are able to look at themselves and know where they can do well and not do well. People that have to be at the central hub of everything are limited because you can't do everything. There's only so many hours in the day. So at some point, you either have to step aside and let someone else run it or focus on this or that. So I think it is interesting, but I don't know if there's anything I'd say they're generally positive. You kind of have to be a positive person to do it. But then again, we're talking to people, they're always positive. When we talk to someone and interview them, we have had people say like, this sucked or that's terrible or we're going out of business. But by and large, people are usually positive. But I guess they don't mind failing. The ones that are really interesting, the ones that I've learned the most from are the ones that don't worry about the past 10 things that have not worked.
Yeah.
They just get back up and keep trying again. So I don't know, call that resiliency or stupidity, but
there's a fine line. Yeah.
I know. How do you define the difference between these things? I mean, in one sense, you're, hallucinating. On the other, you're a visionary.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I think it's the scorecard at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like that's probably it. Is just, did you eventually get it right? If yes, visionary.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's really not a huge difference. So I think that's probably helped me a lot to have a little more tolerance for just insanity in general, because I'm just batshit crazy myself anyways. And I think that, you kind of find most people are if you get deep enough down the rabbit hole. So it works,
yeah.
Right?
I'm wondering, we'll go back to the question that I prematurely posed. Are there any over the last decade or so stories that just kind of really stand out to you, have etched their place into your mind as, you unearthed something really powerful in this conversation. They some important truth showed up, or just for whatever reason it was funny, it was great, but these conversations are very meaningful to you over the last 10 years?
So many, it's hard to actually pin one of them down. I think in general, there's a lot of power in a good open-ended question, and asking something that might get more of a conceptual response than a specific, tangible one. They're all very specific to an industry. And I don't know that any of these are really things that come up in the article necessarily. Like, we interviewed an individual who has a manufacturing operation, and they're in a number of countries, and I was asking him what he was up to and how it was going, and he was talking about their new factory in Russia, and he was saying it's like we're betting the farm. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know. I just find that every 10 years for us to stay as an industry leader, just like at least 3 decades now, we just have to kind of lay it all on the line for something. And I'm doing that again. I don't know why, but we're doing that. I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. So, those kind of tolerances because risk, right? I mean, that's the prevailing theme between all of them and all the people that we have profiled, is that there's an element of risk, monetary risk. They're all entrepreneurs in the private sector. And so risk tolerance is probably a really big one, and how people are okay with risk or calculated risk. And I think that's really fascinating, right? Because if you have no tolerance for risk, then starting your own business is really not a very good thing for you to try and do. Yeah. And you can be surprised at people who you would think come from a background that wouldn't tolerate risk, that can get out there and build amazing businesses. I mean, so it's not like you can't look at it and just see it right away. And I guess that actually is echoed from the work that I was doing with CureFit. These guys look at companies and evaluate whether it's a company that can run or not. And you look at these things, it's not always obvious that it would or wouldn't work. I think the risk is probably the most interesting one. It's a very American thing, our lack of sensitivity to risk compared to other cultures. We're happy to try the GMO beef or whatever it is. I'm not saying me,
Sure.
We live in Asheville. I mean, there'd probably be torches and pitchforks, right? But I just think in general, we're more comfortable with risk, and that's really interesting for what it means to capitalism and to other things that relate to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation, particularly the difference between other countries and how people, evaluate things. And on the one hand, some people say, oh, Americans, they don't know how to save. They don't know how to put money away for another time. But on the other hand, then we, as you kind of pointed out, we have perhaps this ability to have blind ambition and say, I can do this, because that's the American dream, or, however you want to put it.
No, that's exactly right.
Interesting. Yeah.
We're pioneers as a culture, right? I mean, people came here to go someplace new, to try something new, to do something new, something that no one else had tried. And so, that's in the founding element of the mission statement of the magazine. Like, we profile the people who take risk and the people who support them to inspire others to go and do likewise.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
That's definitely a part of the inspiration for me to do this, was to try and share with other people that actually everyone does everything that they do for the first time from a place of ignorance. And over time, you build knowledge and experience, and you clean it up as you go, but you have to start. Actually, and that relates to an article I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, about the class of 2020. And the overall point was, don't wait. Like, it's not going to look like what you want it to look like. It's not going to be the job you thought you were going to get. But the most important thing is to get on the train and go. Get on the train and start moving. And that's probably the other I mean, that relates to everything we've been talking about these, what makes an entrepreneur successful in any sense is like they just keep moving, don't stop, get back up and keep trying. And I think that would probably, you would see this, and you probably these kinds of people, like if you wanted to do something, who cares if it's, getting a job at a company where you're like the janitor, give you a couple years, you'll be in there, you'll be showing up at meetings, you can find a way in, and that's the most important part. So just start and do something, and that's, I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, I guess, starting and then finding your way in. So, we talked a lot about how you started Capital at Play, and sort of got it off the ground running, but how have you seen it change and evolve over the past 10 years? And particularly thinking about challenges that you faced or big successes or big improvements that were made over time.
Well, I think the one that's probably the most evident to me is that it's not about the medium, which is just to bring it to where we started the conversation. I mean, we're talking about business content and entrepreneurship, and it's really doesn't matter whether it's in print or whether it's in a video or a podcast or wherever it is. Like that's what we're trying to do, is just continue to serve our audience here in more ways that work for them. And yeah, I think that's probably shaped a lot of my thinking around content in general. Kind of breaking down a lot of those barriers and just seeing it for what it is. Right? It's an idea. It's just a tidbit of wisdom or of something interesting or entertaining. And actually, I've just been writing my first column for Capital at Play on content and storytelling, and breaking that down. Right? Separating out the media, the idea for the content, from the medium that you want to put that idea into, to the channel that you want to distribute it with. Each one of those pieces has to be separated so you can understand what's affecting your success or lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
So
how do you think about content and storytelling, and structuring, what goes into each magazine?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Mm-hmm. It relates to something we talked about, right? I think you said it differently, but I'd say everybody's in publishing. Mm-hmm. And so that's really obvious now. I mean, even Facebook doesn't want to call themselves a publisher, but when they're dragged into Congress under a subpoena, they will say we are a publisher. Mm-hmm. And every business that uses a social media platform is a publisher. Everybody that has an email newsletter is a publisher. So the ways in which people use stories to connect with people and have forever. So companies are learning how to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's easy for people to do because it all happens in one head. So it's really tough for companies to do that because there's a lot of people that have to agree, and things get really out of whack by the time you start with an idea and then take it to something that's supposed to go out the door. So I see that as a lot of opportunity. I mean, but that's the funny thing about publishing, is that you could talk about print being a dying medium or something like that, but everybody is in publishing now. There's so much content out there, and finding good ways to use it, and I guess use it effectively as a company, is something everybody's dealing with. So yeah, I'm kind of fascinated just to watch.
What
and
do
to find ways to be a part of it.
Sure. What do you think is, the difference maker between a company telling a good story and a company telling an okay story?
Two things: context and authenticity. Authenticity is really related to credibility too, so they're kind of linked. But yeah, I think those are if I was to put just a couple specific words on it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You can tell when people are playing patty cake on a platform because they kind of feel like they need to be there versus, telling true stories honestly with amazing context. And then all of a sudden as a consumer of the medium, you can just see it. I think that's a great answer. It's hard to pin down. So like, how does one be or become authentic? Hard to say. But I don't think that your first post on Instagram is going to be that authentic. There will not necessarily be too much of a voice, like a powerful, concise, and clear voice in post one. But I think I think that brand and authenticity with context happens over time, channel by channel, content by piece of content. Am I right and wrong on that? Like you can't. I don't think you can just like dump a first thing and say this is us.
Yeah, it's a
no, I agree, and I think it's also. I mean, just as we are right now, there's three of us talking about it, and each person brings different ideas and thoughts to every single thing. Even if we could describe exactly what we were trying to talk about right now, we're all going to talk about it differently, and that kind of. I guess a lot of it, you said it well, and you said it's obvious to the listener. And if the listener is not put first, it all falls apart. And that actually gets back to the magazine which is if the content isn't any good, then people won't read it. And if people won't read it or pay attention to it, the advertisers have no interest in advertising. And then there's no revenue and there's no reason to support it or do any of this. And so I used to say you can't buy our coolness, right? Like you can't buy an article because we have a very specific person we need to pay homage to with that, and it's the person who's digesting it. Right? If they're not actually going to enjoy it, this is all for naught. So that's probably right. I mean, if you've got a company that's trying to get someone to click on a button to buy a product, if they're more focused on getting them, I mean, that's the reason they're doing it, is to get them to buy this thing. I mean, that's the reason the machine exists, to do that. But if they try and shovel content out the door that no one wants to read, just thinking that they can check the box of an email newsletter and it doesn't do what they want it to do, it's like, well, would you have read that?
Yeah.
I know that you wrote it and that you wanted to talk and fill all the space, like paragraphs and paragraphs, but right? Like,
yeah,
absolutely. There's a difference between our revenue and the audience. Like writing something that is powerful to the reader, or recording something that's powerful to the listener, and just the act of creating. I think that is often misunderstood when we look at people's websites and do kind of voice analysis and brand analysis on someone's website. The number one culprit that we find to be bad communication strategy is a I-focused website where it's like me, here's more about me, did you hear this about me, or us, here's us, this brand, it's not focused on the reader and why they're there and why it's good to have them, because this is the place for them. That distinction is a huge difference maker, I think, in businesses, and you pinned it perfectly.
Well, it's like, just like you said, well, okay, sorry, my brain just went like three different directions, but a story requires a relationship. And for that relationship to work, you have to understand what your audience actually wants to listen to, right? If you have a bunch of stuff you want to talk about and they have a bunch of stuff that they want to learn about, only the part where they overlap is the part that's relevant to talk about. Everything extra is shit in the way. Obviously, they don't want to hear everything I have to know about something, so I shouldn't try and tell them all of it. And they're only trying to learn one little piece. So, I don't know. It's you can almost get to a place where it's like a little hard to listen to people sometimes, just because there's so much extra stuff.
Yeah. And so thank you, listener. This is a quick little shout out for making it this far in the episode. And so what we'll say as we transition now to some of the lessons learned over the years into what are we taking forward, right? So you're now, I'd say, in the newest frontier of capital at play. Kind of timestamp, we're in the middle of a very weird time in the world history. But what do you see as you look ahead in 2020 and beyond for capital at play and for yourself?
Well, I think the magazine is given this great opportunity with everything that's going on. And that's probably just a glasses half full perspective, right? I mean, to our prior points, there's a pretty fine line between opportunity and disaster. But it's a great opportunity because a lot of people are actually engaging in things digitally and in different ways in different mediums. So this is an opportunity for us to expand those mediums and find new distribution channels and talk about people, talk with people in a different way. And so I'm kind of excited for that. I mean, that's just fun to watch. And, I'm not the guy we're talking about. There's two types of people. I'm really not as much of the person to run something, to crank the machine. I prefer to build the machine. So I like to take an idea and turn it into revenue and profitable revenue and see all that work, because just like, you can put a podcast together, a piece of content together, but how people engage with that is outside your control. So that's really fun. Like, that's always entertaining to me, to put an idea out there and then see what people do with it, because it's never going to be exactly what you thought. And then you have to pivot and change and tweak the machine and all that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of fun for the magazine. And I also just think that since people are doing more things digitally now, the storytelling element of content and what content can do for a company is more and more and more relevant. And so that's where I'm interested myself, is really finding more ways to help specific companies grow what they're doing because of this opportunity in which people are changing their engagement behavior, right? Like, we've all found that I was never an online grocery shopper. I've become one, and I'm not going back. Like, I mean, I love to go pick out produce and go to the farmer's market and that sort of thing, because I love to cook and I like all of the sensory parts of that. But at the same time, my daughter consumes an egregious amount of milk, and I don't need to go to the store to buy it every time, and I'm not going to go back to that. And so that means they have to find new ways to sell me new things, new products. I mean, that's just the marketer in me, and maybe the fat kid. Anytime there's like a new brand of chips, like, I want to try it, But like, how do you sell me a new brand of chips now? I'm not walking down the aisle to get exposed to it. And I mean, that's just a really easy example. I tend to prefer more complicated problems, just because the person you're selling to or working with, the listener you're engaging with, is usually a little more intelligent if you're dealing with a more complicated product or a more expensive product. So I like that kind of stuff. But you get the idea, right? This is what you all do. You help people connect and engage in these platforms, and there's more and more people using these platforms and these mediums. So if I've spent the last 10 years learning about how to be a publisher, it's pretty sweet to find myself in a world where everyone is a publisher.
Heard. Yeah, we're the language that we used, and you pointed to it earlier, is everyone's a media company, and so everyone's a publisher, everyone's a media company. We've found that the biggest opportunities in my life that have shown up in the last decade are the result of consistently treating myself like a media company. And in the moments where I had the least opportunities or options and like escape hatches available, I was the least media company like. I was not publishing consistently. I think that the trail of breadcrumbs that you can leave by showing your work, telling where you are in your phase of your journey, can be the biggest door opener, and at least that's how we've experienced things. This podcast, has not created a large amount of revenue standalone, like through advertising, but every single cool thing that's happened to us in the last year is the result of us being a media company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't want to get too fine of a point for it if you don't want to talk about it, but I mean, that's the idea with the podcast, right? You're putting out good content so that people can understand, how to put out good content, and you can help them with that same thing. I've continuously found myself getting drugged into projects because of that same thing. It's like, well, you know how to do that, so can you help us do that, but for this other purpose?
Yep.
And so I think that's a brilliant reason to have a podcast, to do what you're doing. It makes a lot of sense.
It's a show don't tell kind of maneuver, and I love that. I think that is a very astute observation on your point of saying the media in the future and consumer habits in the future are now all of a sudden media today and consumer habits today. So how do the smartest businesses show up and changed and play kind of around the bend in the future today. And I once went to, I mentioned it in a past episode, I think, but I once went to a Inc. conference, and it was the keynote speaker was the CEO, and I can't remember his name, of Life is Good, and his keynote was that, or one of the steps in his keynote was that optimism is a pragmatic choice as an entrepreneur. It is not just that the glass is half full and that's how you're wired. It is a logic-based decision to show up that way, because you see opportunity when you look for it, and you can find alternate routes around the obstacle or over the obstacle or under the obstacle when you show up with this optimistic, pragmatic view.
I absolutely. Sorry, I don't mean to have such a stupid grin. I'm absolutely with you. Problem solving is at the heart of it, and it's not about the 100 ways not to do something. It's about the one way that makes it work. I don't know if you're a skier or anything like that, but you can't ski through the trees if you look at the trees. You have to look at the spaces between the trees. I don't know why, but that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And it's a pragmatic situation. You just I can choose to be both of these two things. Let's try to be happy about it, because we can't change it, right? It's that's just the only way to be. And the first smile came because I was thinking of this bit that Jerry Seinfeld does. He's like, if your body was a car, you wouldn't buy it, right? It's just too much maintenance. It's too much work. Everything required. I mean, it's all this stuff, everything that it takes to live is just so much damn work. And, it sort of makes me think when people say these are the best years of your life, well, when do those end? Because I'll check out then. It's not worth doing all this stuff otherwise, right? It's just, I don't know. There's so many reasons why that's a must, just from a logical perspective. I'm so with you.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you some Asheville-based questions now. And
Sure.
And the first Asheville-based question is, in a post-coronavirus or pre-coronavirus world, what would a friends coming into town weekend look like to you? What kind of things would be musts? We got to go to this place or check out this place. And I know, because you are very empathetic and thoughtful, the answer is going to be, well, it depends on who is visiting. And to which we say, cool, choose someone and just tell us what a weekend would look like with that type of person.
Well, can you give me some context? Yeah, I'm from here. So most friends that I have are going to be people that are from here. Perfect. But so I do have friends from elsewhere. So
there you go. Friends from out of town who are like, hey, finally checking this box. We're on our way to Asheville. Do you have recommendations, or when can I see you? Where would we meet?
Yeah, I literally have a shared notes with my wife and a good friend and coworker, Bonnie, with visitor ideas, just to not have, we literally just throw in things when they're on there. So, on my top visitor, I got to have to revise this. Some of these, okay, I'm not going to read off of it because that's terrible, but I literally just have a list of ideas and food and drink places, just because there's so many good ones that it's hard to necessarily pick. But my best days are always ones that involve really good exercise and really good food. It's actually a bummer that I think we're so spoiled here with our wonderful local supply chains of food. You don't realize till you go elsewhere that people will brag about all this stuff. I'm like, that was just food. That wasn't anything amazing. That was just good food, right? I got it. No offense, but you get so spoiled around here. So usually someone comes into town, we'd love to have a good meal, do some cooking, or go out to eat somewhere nice. I like to tie one on as much as the next 33-year-old, and I'm probably overdue for one of those. Yeah. And, sitting by a fire, I think I can, I'll do this, the cliche quote that I like to drop, the happiest times my heart knows are those in which it is pouring forth its greatest affections to a few esteemed characters. And that's pretty much it. I like to sit around and talk about ideas and talk about whatever I'm doing or whatever other people are doing, because problem solving and, business and all that stuff, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's the topic right now is what's with all this behavioral change, right? Anytime you have a disruption like what we're going through, obviously it's a disaster for the economy financially, but businesses will continue to exist and people will come up with new ideas. So what are those ideas? What does this mean, and how can we think through that to find a business idea? This is not my way of breaking it down, but the best way that I've learned to break it down is what's a market opportunity that's out there, and then what are the challenges to overcoming, to get to that opportunity, and how do you solve that problem to then package it up into a product or service to do something with, right? What does that look like start to finish? So that's probably it right now. I mean, just trying to watch and see and be out there and think. And
yeah, I love that entrepreneur's mind. My favorite thing to do is go get good food and a drink and create market opportunities. Like that's so. I mean, that's so.
But that's funny.
It.
I mean, I feel
that's
like we talk a lot of we own a business together and we live together and we're husband and wife, and it can be intense sometimes, but I do find that we love talking about our business. We love talking about like new ideas and concepts. So
and the relative your business, whoever that person is,
Sure.
or your passion, whoever that person is, and having people around a table. There's a thing that I've heard. I want to say it was from maybe Tim Ferriss's book, but the idea that there is a strong correlation, can't call it causation, between people who have multiple hour meals and their frequency that they have these multiple hour long meals, and the quality of their life, like life expectancy and stress, and all of the like positive and negative health indicators are correlated with the frequency with which you have like 2 or 3 hour meals with friends and acquaintances and family members. And so that is something that we too hold in high esteem, is that nowhere to go, let's just talk place. Around a fire would be a bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this quote about a year ago, and it rang so true. And now I just kind of laugh when I think about it from time to time, depending on who I'm talking with and what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying laughing like looking down, because I certainly well, let me just tell you the quote so this all makes sense. But it was something like, strong minds discuss ideas, mediocre minds discuss events, and weak minds discuss people, or something like that. And it was attributed to Socrates, right? And it is totally true, because to talk and gossip about people is super easy, does not take a lot of, it's a cheap thrill. And, one that doesn't really, they have their hangovers. So, suffice to say, not the best kind of content you can digest on the day-to-day. Events are a little more tricky, but there's context and there's a good story, and you can talk about that kind of stuff. But ideas, I really know, like the best friends in my life are the ones that I can just talk about ideas with. Anything from like, why is a doorknob designed like this? And what does that mean? Like, how do you interact with it? And what do you like about that? And the feel and the sound and all that stuff. You just talk about whatever. Like, it shouldn't matter, because you can break it all down and it's just fun. And that's what I end up doing with my closest friends. Talk. One buddy who's the best man in my wedding. We talk every day almost, and it's always just some idea. He has an electronic recycling company, and so there's like all kinds of ideas always going about this problem or that problem or whatever it is. It's just, I don't know, problems or opportunities, because they're fun to solve. And maybe that's the cheap thrill, is that it's fun to have a good solution and to see it implemented.
Yeah. I think that's definitely an astute observation. We have this kind of standard question that we ask everyone at the end of every interview, which is, if we had a magic wand, or somebody in our audience had a magic wand, what one thing would you ask for in this moment?
I mean, are we talking like could end Corona right now kind of thing? I mean, like,
you're welcome.
I feel like that's I don't know. Does that really answer the question? Because I mean, that's like world peace, right? I mean, that's great. I mean, I would love that. All those things would be wonderful, but maybe we wouldn't learn anything by it, and maybe that's just not a really fair answer to you. I mean, right now, 1:30 on Friday, I would really like for Foothills Meats to be open so that I could go get the Foothills burger. It's 2 patties. It's just fantastic. And their fries are cooked in tallow, which is beef fat. And man, that would be sweet right now. They're not open. That or like a whole donut. But I mean, that's just in the food category,
Those are great
but
answers.
it's 1:30 on a Friday.
Yeah.
We feel you. We're hungry.
Yeah.
So
I
good answer.
cannot.
It's just, I don't know. What about you? What would you have right now? I mean, maybe it'd be like 1 million listeners. I don't know.
Yeah, distribution. No, I honestly, my immediate right now moment is a food answer. Would it be a burger? I don't know. I do love burgers. Maybe like a Yoki burger with a Hawaiian patty or a potato roll top. Something accessible. I think that there's a couple different types of burgers, and 2 of the 3 are like inaccessible. Like you're not making this burger at home. But then there's this type of burger which is like on a Martin's potato roll, and it feels like this could have happened on a grill in a backyard, but it's just somehow better than you've ever had on a grill in a backyard. That type of burger would make me very happy right now.
I know exactly what you're talking about. So like that's if there's something that gets me through like days, you can ask people that know me. I have like lunch spots. Like I love and maybe it goes back to like starting the magazine when you have like a really crappy day. Like you go see 3 people, no one buys. Like this other thing that was supposed to happen didn't happen. And I don't know, like just for whatever reason, it's a Wednesday and you haven't talked to anybody in like 2 days. And I just go see like 2 movies. Like just F it. Let's try again tomorrow. I don't know. And a good meal is the same kind of thing. So to go and have this special thing that's it's not permanent. And that's what's so amazing about it, right? Like minute by minute, it's changing. And so to just get it the right time, I'd sound like I would be a nightmare guest at a restaurant. It just makes me so happy. I call it my happy meal, to go and get a happy meal. Yeah. Like not an actual McDonald's happy meal, but a meal that makes me happy because it is everything I need is just the best.
And when you have your spot too, like you said you had your lunch spots, those places that you rely on. And then like when you are having that crappy day, you know that that's going to be good. Yeah. And so there's just happiness even thinking about it. I think that
heard. And I love that you call it a happy meal. I will almost, when moments like that, I'll say, this is my happy place. Yeah. A la Peter Pan. But in that moment, it is also true. This is my happy meal. I love that. Are there any other questions other than where in the World Wide Web do we find, Oby, where in the World Wide Web will our listeners connect with you and get to follow more of your story?
That's a damn good question. Well, this seems like an appropriate place to mention that I have a podcast. I think you all know that we're going to be launching in the next couple weeks. So look for that in Capital at Play's newsletter. So you can go to capitalatplay.com and sign up for that and hear whether or not I'm a horrific flop or something mildly entertaining to digest. It'll be super short.
And you'll be the host of this podcast, correct?
Yeah, not doing, just trying to go where you've already gone, essentially, in terms of, sounding like I'm professional-ish. Thankfully, we've got a little help on that. But ultimately, that would be one place. Anybody can email me at any time at oby@capitalatplay.com. And I don't know. I guess it's such a funny thing. My chamber board seat is winding down. I don't know. I'm looking for new things. So just stay tuned. I'm working on some new projects and looking for interesting opportunity, which is like, this is such a good time to do it. It's funny. It was like almost the same place a decade ago that I was doing this as well. It's like, okay,
let's run it back.
Somehow this is my timing as we start things when they're at the bottom. Yeah. So, that's about it. I wish I had a more inspirational answer, honestly. Maybe we should get a burger sometime and discuss these things. I don't know.
Look forward to that burger. I'm going to go ahead and this is my assumption. Are you on LinkedIn? I feel like LinkedIn would be a good place to connect with you, but I might be wrong.
Oh no, LinkedIn is a great place. And actually, because I've been working on writing, and I mean, this is such a bizarre time, but it is a fun time to like learn a lot of new things.
Yeah.
So I'm working on learning and writing and all this sort of thing. So I've got a column that'll start in Capital at Play next. What month is it? Jesus,
It's May.
It's
We're
May.
mid-May.
Yeah, so in the June edition, if they decide to run it, and I'm going to publish that on LinkedIn, and it's on storytelling and why that's not just a marketer's gobbledygook. And yeah, LinkedIn's a great place to do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so much easier than an email. God.
Well, no, I email for direct, follow along LinkedIn. I for whatever reason, I feel my gut says that like I should spend 20 to 30 minutes like scouring your LinkedIn connections and just being like, oh wow, oh who knew that? Okay, that's cool. That's just
I don't think you can.
No,
I hate to say it. I have those turned off.
Okay, well, bummer.
Maybe you can see them. I don't know if you can see them or not. It's a great question. But tell me what you find.
Cool.
How's that?
I'll let you know because that's one of my ways, and this is the last little nugget in today's episode, I think. But one of my ways of attempting to create connection and depth in new business relationships is attempting to force serendipity by spending a little bit of time on someone's LinkedIn or whatever channel is like a good reference for who they are and where they've been and what they've done. And so I was going to, by the time we have our next burger, I was going to do a little audit of your LinkedIn to create some serendipities.
Check it out, man. I actually need to go back and look, and I think LinkedIn's brilliant because they give people the most organic exposure right now anyways. But I had to wipe all this stuff. You can't have, when I was doing work with the investment bank, you can't have endorsements. I had to wipe all the endorsements away, which sucks. I mean, not that I really had any endorsements that were meaningful. It'd be like, endorsed for knowing a good burger joint. But still,
Proficient in Excel.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I would go to for data entry. Why does LinkedIn ask me who I would go to for data entry? That seems like the biggest waste of everyone's time. Alas, LinkedIn is a good channel for organic exposure. We completely agree there. Oby, thank you so much for your time this Friday afternoon. Here's to that burger that you were dreaming of, and here's to world peace and all that other fluffy stuff as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And that was episode 56 with Oby Morgan of Capital at Play. And we said it in the beginning of the episode, but that story is so inspiring to see the growth over 10 years from idea to institution locally. I mean, I hope that after hearing this, you are thinking about yourself and your business as a media company or as a publisher. Telling stories is such a strong way to build a brand, to grow sales, to build a relationship with your clients and customers. Please, 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 if there's a single soundbite that stands out, consider yourself a publisher.
And there was lots of great information in this episode. If you want to learn more about Oby, you want to connect with him, or you want to learn more about anything that we talked about, like books, links, concepts, etc., we have everything listed on our show notes page at makingitinashville.com/056.
And if you liked this episode, we ask with a very deep bow of appreciation that you please go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review or a quick written review to let the world know. Those reviews mean so much in helping this podcast get found by other people, get our audience and our guests' stories told. And so for that, we are very thankful for your reviews.
And also don't forget to subscribe. You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player, as well as subscribe to our newsletter, which is where we announce new episodes, behind the scenes information. It's where we announce our events and new products, etc. It's the first to hear about it. You can learn all the ways to subscribe on makingitinashville.com/subscribe.
Perfect. And one more time, we want to give a huge shout out and thank you to our season sponsor, Range Urgent Care. Again, there are so many reasons why we are grateful and pleased to share the story of Range as a local business that's doing things fundamentally different in their space. Range is a walk-in urgent care clinic. Primarily, you're going to use Range by either virtual visits or online scheduling. So a lot of the, I would say horrible, but the bad parts of urgent care has been fixed in the Range model. The biggest bad part that I've experienced in years past has been pricing, not knowing how much it's going to cost, being afraid of medical service because you don't know if you can afford it with Range. That is not the case. You're either going to spend $149 each visit, or you'll have a subscription plan where you might pay, if you're a single person, $30 a month. If you're a family, more. Businesses, more. We have an incredible special, a promotion that Range has created exclusively for you, a Making It in Asheville podcast listener. If you go to makingitinasheville.com/range, there will be links to their annual subscription plans. And because you listen to this podcast, you get your first month free on any of the subscriptions. So one more time, makingitinasheville.com/range to learn more.
And we'd also like to take a moment just to let you know that this podcast is sponsored and powered by our very own marketing agency, Making It Creative. Tony and I founded Making It Creative when we first moved to Asheville, and our biggest goal and what we try to do with all of our clients is to understand what is the biggest lever that we can pull marketing-wise to connect better with their audience, to grow their audience, and to convert them into customers. And so that ends up looking like a whole bunch of different things, from email marketing to rewriting copy on your website or on your marketing materials, to social media, to content creation.
Yeah, and to
really
working
depends.
strategically on sales and sales messaging, and what is your sales process. And a level above or below, depending on how you think about triangles, we think about brand, and just like, what story are you telling on an absolute level, and which parts are most important. So if you're interested in hearing more about our business that supports this podcast, please visit makingitcreative.com.
And lastly, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, we're always looking for a new guest. You can nominate them at makingitinasheville.com/podcast. We have a form there that you can fill out with more information about you or the guests that you'd like to nominate. And also, please, please, please join us for our monthly Monday Maker Mixer. That is a social networking event. Currently, right now, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so this event is taking place virtually online. However, before and after all of this is over, they will take place in person. Anyways, we'd love to meet you. We'd love to get to know you and see your face one way or another.
And the way to find out about those events is going to be by joining and participating on our email list. And you can get on that email list all over the place on the website, but makingitinasheville.com/subscribe is our catch-all for all of the places you can hang out with us. Least we forget to mention YouTube, where that is our newest and, I guess, most exciting new platform. We video these interviews now and video ourselves on the intro and outro. So if you're watching on YouTube, high five to you. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. Check out the YouTube channel. And Sarah, that was episode 56. High five. Based on you. I don't know. Cool. Thank you, YouTube, for watching to the very end.